petrol ve gaz fiyatlarında trendler ve beklentiler konusunu tartışmak üzere TESPAM Başkanı Sayın Oğuzhan Akyener, OPEC Alternatif Enerji Kaynakları Baş Analisti Sayın Doktor Erfan Vafai Fard ve Baker Hughes'tan Doktor Reza Ethadi'yi yayına davet ediyorum.
Thanks very much. Is it possible to start now? Thanks very much. Welcome to our TESPAM special session on trends and expectations on oil and gas prices in EIF Congress. This is going to be an interesting presentation, I hope. Undoubtedly, oil prices are one of the most important items affecting the trends in the global economy. In addition to global effects being the price levels directly influencing the individual budgets and preferences, strategic and impacts reaches much higher levels than the expectations. To interpret the impact levels of price fluctuations for different social roles, for example, short-term fluctuations are important nearly for all different roles of groups such as consumers, governments, producers, traders, investors, and ordinary individuals. Of course, the demand which we are going to focus on today is an important issue that influences all the things. But mid and long-term projections are also important mainly for investors, analysts, governments for the budgets, for example, for the budget of Turkey. And for example, before taking a final investment decision for any oil development projects, we have to know minimum 25 years. In this regard, long-term oil price estimations becomes very important for mainly investors and governments. In order to make long-term estimations for oil prices, initially we have to determine the roles and tendencies of main variables in the price equations. There are many different elements that are affecting the prices in oil markets, such as supply and demand balances. For example, today the pandemic changed everything globally. Economic trends, social and political risks, black oil sales, and etc. As TESPAM, we already have published some documents regarding with global estimations for long-term oil demand and price projections. You can find all those results from our websites. Today, in this special session, we would like to again discuss the oil estimations for oil and gas demands and prices. And we have very important experts working direct on these areas. Let's not waste time for this introduction part and back to our speaker. Let me shortly introduce our speakers. Initially, Dr. Erfan Vafai Fard, he's the Chief Alternative Sources of Energy Analyst in OPEC. He's going to present us the latest global oil demand projections, which has already prepared and declared by OPEC. And it's going to be very interesting for us, I hope. As our second speaker, Dr. Reza Ethadi, he is living in Texas and a special advisor in Baker Hughes, and he will talk about the transformation of oil and gas industry with the latest developments in technology and mainly which are based in US. Let's start with Mr. Dr. Erfan, and the floor is yours. Please, you can share your screen also.
So I hope now you have my screen. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, sir Akyener, thank you so much for inviting me. First of all, on behalf of His Excellency Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo, OPEC Secretary General, I would like also to extend the thanks for inviting OPEC to participate in this important panel. Also, following the tragic earthquake in Izmir, and on behalf of OPEC Secretary General, I would like to extend our deep condolence and solidarity message, also wishing all injuries speedy recovery. As you know, our World Oil Outlook was launched recently in 8th of October in Vienna, the 2020 version. This year is also the 60th anniversaries of OPEC Foundation. As you know, OPEC was founded exactly 60 years ago with the specific aim of securing an efficient and economic supply of oil for the consuming nations, enabling a steady investments in petroleum industry, and in turn, providing essential support to the global economy. The World Oil Outlook, which is our flagship or a publication at OPEC, and it is in fact a manifestation of these founding principles of OPEC. Each edition of WOO, World Oil Outlook, provides a timely and essential reference for all energy stakeholders, and its continuity is a symbol of stability, something which we need most at the moment. Or this year World Oil Outlook provides the OPEC Secretariat's in-depth analysis and look at the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the other issues in the global energy and oil market. So with this in mind, I would like to give you some brief insights and key insights from the World Oil Outlook 2020. We start with our key assumptions of the outlook. We have the expectation for the global population to increase from around 77 billion to 9.5 billion in the predicted period, which is 2019 to 2045. We expect 96% of this population growth in non-OECD countries, and most of the GDP growth also driven by non-OECD countries. India is expected to remain the fastest growing developing countries with rate GDP growth of 5.6%. And China's economy is rapidly also moving, and we expect still a deceleration of 2.8% per year. We expect, of course, increase in the GDP growth, but this rate is decelerated this time compared to the past. GDP growth in OECD also is estimated at average of 1.6%. In the outlook, we assume an evolutionary development of existing energy policies and technology through this time. So we don't expect a sudden increase, especially in our base case scenario. We don't expect a breakthrough, which can be a big game changer. So outlook accounts for key energy-related policy initiatives in major regions. Internal combustion engines will remain the dominance for the foreseeable future, and shared mobility growing swiftly, especially in urban areas. Potential of hydrogen being explored to meet the environmental policy objectives, and due to effect of COVID-19, we considered also the remote working continues for a while. Continued energy efficiency gains are considered, and IATA and ICAO and IMO policy initiatives also for aviation and marine transport sector are considered. So with these assumptions in mind, we can have a look at our projections for the time being. We first of all, we expect that all energy sources needed to facilitate the economic recovery and future demand and to reduce the energy poverty. So we need all the sources. Following the large drop in 2020, global primary energy demand is forecast to continue growing in long term, increasing by a significant of 25% in the period of 2019 to 2045. So we also expect the demand to increase in non-OECD regions and also drop in the OECD. The key drivers of this demand is expected, of course, by doubling the GDP growth and also around 1.7 billion people additionally living on the Earth by 2045. And given the pace of the demand growth, it remains very clear that all forms of energy will be needed to support the post-pandemic recovery and to address the long-term energy needs of human being. And also, this means that we don't have one size solution fits to all. So, looking at each type of fuels, we expect renewable energies to continue fast growing. In fact, we expect other renewables to experience the largest growth, both in absolute terms and also the rate of growth. We expect also gas to be the second largest growing fuel, with around 24 million barrels of oil equivalent per day growth in this specific period. And coal will be the only fossil fuel we see a decline. And oil also we expect to retain its dominant share in the energy mix during this period. Even its portion of contribution to the whole energy mix will reduce due to substitution of other fuels and also the energy efficiency increase and technology. So, looking at the regions, primary energy demand in China and India accounts for around 50% of the total demand growth in developing countries during this period. So we expect 0.9%, almost 1% per year growth for India and about 2.8% for China. Energy consumption in non-OECD countries will remain coupled with the rapid economic growth, but demand in OECD is expected to decline over the long term, particularly in OECD Europe. We expect reduction of energy demand. Looking at oil more specifically, we see that assuming that COVID-19 is largely contained in the coming year, oil demand should partially recover in 2021, a relatively high increment in 2022 and 2023. Normalization of what we call it demand, normalization of demand growth toward the end of the medium-term period is also forecasted, and this is what we see in the medium term for the demand for oil. Looking at the regions again, this demand growth will be driven by non-OECD, as also mentioned before. Incremental demand between 2019 and 2025 is projected to be around 5 million barrels of oil equivalent per day, and China is set to see the largest increment in between 1.4, and India then the highest growth rate, 3.2. Road transportation and aviation sector will remain the key, will remain the most affected, of course, during the COVID time. Oil demand in road transportation sector will return to 2019 level as we expected by 2022, and a bit later, 2024 for the aviation. Chemicals will continue growing, and a healthy rate of 1.3% is expected despite the temporary decline that we see in 2020. Almost 70% of the incremental oil demand between 2019 and 2025 is driven by light crude products that is taking the major share of the whole package. So looking a bit at the longer term, long oil demand is projected to reach 109 million barrels by 2045. Oil demand will increase by around 10 million barrels then in between this period, and OECD oil demand will continue to decline, as we also mentioned before. Oil demand in non-OECD will also grow by around 22 million barrel, and this will offset, of course, a part of the decline in the OECD region. So, we also expect international oil demand at the global level to decelerate in the long term. Average incremental demand to 2030 is projected around 0.7 million barrels per day, per year. And at the global level, healthy demand growth in the first part of the forecast period will be followed by plateauing oil demand in the second part, as we expect. This is obviously because of the population growth, which moderates significantly in this period, long-term GDP growth, which slows, and more service-oriented sector, which will be in place, and also less oil-intensive structure of the economy, and further efficiency improvements and fuel switching and substitutions that also impact this trend. Transportation and petrochemicals still remain the key to the future of the demand. Several transportation modes will continue providing basis for oil demand. Petrochemical also will be the largest source of incremental demand by around 3.7 million barrels oil per day. And some demand increase also in other industries, and residential, commercial, and agricultural sector is expected. Electric generation also around 1 million barrels per day will be playing in game. So regarding the EVs, and the share of EVs is projected to reach more than 16% in 2045. 2.6 billion vehicles on the road by 2045 is projected, and around 430 million would be the EVs. The share of EVs will be around 5% in 2030, 13% in 2040 on the road, and more than 16%, as I mentioned, in 2045. Natural gas vehicles also will count for around 120 million. And the oil demand in road transportation sector at a relatively stable level will be around 47 million barrels and after 2023. By this, I will just conclude on some key takeaways of the presentation. The COVID pandemic has transformed oil markets and increased the uncertainty. Oil markets experienced the largest ever demand contraction when the pandemic started, but the first signs of recovery is visible. All forms of energy will be needed to allow us for economic recovery, reduction of energy poverty, and also a sustainable energy future. Healthy oil demand growth in the first part of the forecast period will be followed by plateauing the demand in the second part. Nevertheless, oil will retain the highest share in the global energy mix, even while the share of renewables grows also rapidly. Prospects for growth in non-OPEC supply, we also have it themed. We also require steady investment in OPEC member countries to increase the production to meet the world's demand. And the downstream sector also has been affected by weaker oil demand prospects and will need consolidations. So I thank you so much for your attention. You can access our detailed report and interactive version via our website, also via our smart app. There are several chapters and discussions around the topics, and you can freely access to this via OPEC website. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Arfan, for this nice presentation. Do you want the video to be played, or
if you have time?
Let's initially, before the video, let's initially listen to Mr. Reza, and after take the questions, and if after those parts, if we can find any time, we will make the video played. Okay, it's going to be better for us. Now I want to leave the floor to Mr. Reza. He's attending from the United States and Texas, the heart of the United States oil. We are listening him, and I would like Mr. Reza to mention also the price sides. And previously we have faced with a big crisis in VTI prices, which is coming from usually the Texas origin. Mr. Reza, it's your turn, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Oğuzhan. Thank you very much, Irfan, for your great presentation. I mean, it was very good to have the OPEC also to listen to OPEC, also to see, I mean, what is the expectation. Actually, that we share the same expectation in terms of the increasing in the demand and until 2030, and then maybe we will reach to the peak, and then it start to be plateau until 2050s. But in terms of the let's say this is a one part of the, let's say, story. Another part of the story is not the demand; it's the supply. A supply in terms right now, considering all this, let's say, the advance in the technology, I don't think so we will have any, let's say, the issue in the supply. I mean, since assuming all this, let's say, the new technology in the fracking and also horizontal drilling and digital transformations, digitalization, automations. I mean, there will be no problem in the let's say, meet the demand from the, let's say, operators, and most probably even it will reduce the cost of the production. I mean, I'm thinking about the new technologies, especially automation in upcoming years. We will see the reduction in the cost of the production, significant reduction, and that will keep the oil price most probably not very high, but I mean it will increase the profit margin for the oil operators and keep the industry profitable. At the same time, it will help us to reduce the carbon footprint in terms of the, let's say, most of the big companies, I mean, operators in Europe and the US and service companies started to plan for the zero carbon emission by the 2050. And that's also another story. So we have to reduce the, let's say, the carbon footprint in all these operations. And as a Baker Hughes, we promised to reduce our carbon footprint to zero by 2050, and by 2030, we promised to reduce it by 50%. And this is the same trend happening in the Shell, BP, and also, let's say, ExxonMobil and other, let's say, big operators. And I'm sure for it will also most probably we will expect it the same, let's say, policy from the national oil companies. I mean, in the upcoming years, they will start to take that initiative. And for now, I would say, and I don't know whether if you know, the Baker Hughes has one, let's say, the interesting statistics. We are always, I mean, having the rig count statistics. I mean, every week we are counting the number of the rigs in the world. I mean, operating and reported. And I think that is the most important indicator about the supply for the next upcoming years. I'm not talking about the long term, but I mean about the, let's say, short term supply 520 reduction. So it will indicate that almost, let's say, the more than 50% activity in the production side or supply side, I mean, reduced to this year. I mean, because of the pandemic mostly, and also, let's say, supply chain interruptions because of the pandemic, and also, as you know, the consequence of the economic conditions for the market demand, especially in the US. So most probably we are expecting some kind of, let's say, the price peak in the next year, in the next maybe 2021 or 2022, because of that, let's say, this reduction in the rig count this year. So there is no too much, let's say, investment. I mean, it indicates that, I mean, we have a more than 50% reduction in the investment in the production. So there will be some kind of, let's say, maybe, let's say, increase in to be a witness of how the system is working here. I mean, you can see, for example, the rig count could go from the, right now it's around the 300, but I mean, if the next year price go up, even the $5 or $6, I mean, the rig will add by maybe 500 or 600 more rig will come to active mode. So most of the, let's say, the operators right now in terms of the fracking industries, I mean, is starting, the system start to shift from the small operators, I mean, in the Midwest, I mean, to the big operators. I mean, up to now, not the big operators have too much interest in the fracking, but I mean, they start to invest in the fracking industry, BP, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and start to buy the asset, I mean, and invest right now. And so they know, for example, the price will go up, and once the price will go up, they can get the return from the investment very fast. So right now, the best environment is for the investment in the production. So that's from me, and if you have any question, I will be more than happy to answer.
Thanks very much, Mr. Reza, for your discussing and speech. Now we have some questions. Let me ask about the questions. Let's start with Mr. Erfan. Mr. Erfan, in your 7th slide, can you open the potential of hydrogen resources? What are expectations about that?
Thank you for the question. We see a potential for hydrogen, especially for blue and somehow green hydrogen. It's already used in the industry, in oil refining, in ammonia production, or in methanol production. Also, there is a technology available at some point for expansion of the use of hydrogen. But the key issue is, as you know, the cost and the price, especially the source of supply. So if it is natural gas, or it is water, or it's gonna be renewables at some points, but at the moment, with the costs of renewables, extraction of hydrogen with the renewable based sources is not very feasible, but we expect a potential. And we see it's growing with the cost reduction of the fuels and of the renewables, and also maturity of the technology and reduction of the costs.
Yeah. For example, also in TESPAM, we have studied we have studied the hydrogen investment, hydrogen research costs, and like that. According to our estimations, globally the world will be able to focus on the hydrogen studies minimum, but this is according to our estimation, minimum through 2040s. Hence, this is directly related with the natural gas costs. Hence, you know, the natural gas is very cheap these days, and in the future we are expecting an important increase in the natural gas prices. But it's changed up to time. Lots of other issues have to be considered for those estimations. We have to put lots of assumptions. But also we have some estimation like that. I would like to ask Mr. Reza about Mr. Reza, what do you think United States productions level will reach again 13.5 million barrel per day levels? If you expect such a thing, when do you think? Hence, the industry, the oil industry in United States felt in a very bad position due to pandemic and the low oil prices. I know the Trump administration has done lots of things to solve these problems, but when do you think the supply side, and you also mentioned lots of things about the supply side, what do you think about the supply side of United States? And as a second question, maybe you can integrate both how U.S. elections, and we are all waiting for the U.S. elections, how your U.S. elections results may affect the oil market and prices.
Sure. Thank you very much for questions. Actually, I believe, as I mentioned, just because of the nature of the fracking industry, it is very flexible for that, let's say, fluctuations, and also technologies we are using right now in terms of the reducing the costs, especially the automations and the digitalizations. I mean, it will reduce the production cost, and I'm sure the fracking industries, I mean, will recover very fast. I mean, we see the same trend in the 2014. Now, there was let's say the reductions in the oil price due to the increase in the productions. It's a kind of, let's say, the oil production increase from the Saudis, and so it reduced the oil price very fast, as you remember, from the hundreds per $100 per barrel. It reduced to around $20 per barrel, but it will cost a lot of, let's say, the interruptions in the production of fracking industry in the US, but I mean, at the same time, it helped the fracking industry to get more, to use the new technologies, and then reduce the cost of the productions, and then optimize the operations, and reduce and increase the profit, increase the productivity. So and right now also they are using the same. We are going to even beyond that, let's say, level. I mean, at the 2014, between 2014 and 2016 or 17, because of that, let's say, the interruption in the market, I mean, increase in the supply from the OPEC. So it costs reducing the price, and develop a lot of, let's say, new technologies developed in terms of, let's say, for example, the finding the sweet points instead of, let's say, the fracking everywhere. So there was that much more, let's say, scientific, let's say, or technology. They use the more sensors, more, let's say, the effective methods in terms of the frackings and how you can, for example, control the frack by using the data analytics, machine learning technologies. And right now we are even going beyond that. I mean, the plan is using even make a production or the operations fully automated without, let's say, having any human involved in this. Means, I mean, that drilling the well without, let's say, human involvement, and that will be happen. A lot of, let's say, companies are working in these areas, and I'm sure it will be happen soon, maybe within the 1 or 2 years. That there are, let's say, some examples, I mean, happening. I mean, the pilot test is happening, but most probably within the 1 or 2 years, I mean, we will see the fully automated technologies is in the rig, and that will reduce the cost, and then it will increase also the, let's say, ramping up the production in the US. And I am sure, I mean, it will increase the production, but as you said, I mean, it depends on also the US elections. I mean, mostly, I mean, Republicans are more, let's say, friendly for the oil industry, and then and the Democrats a little bit, let's say, that like to maybe put the more limits or policies. I mean, and if that happen, I mean, in terms of the, let's say, Democrats get the election, so it will maybe, I mean, reduce the ramping up. I mean, we will have a little bit, let's say, longer time to ramping up, but that's in the long term, I don't think so it will have a too much effect, because, I mean, everything is dependent on the supply and demand. I mean, if you have a high demand, so price will go out, and the same thing, I mean, the producer will increase the supply. So most probably, yes, within the maybe, I mean, 1 or 2 years, the US production will go up.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I have another question for Mr. Erfan. I would like to ask, what is your expectation, maybe your personal expectations, or if OPEC has some studies regarding with that, expectations about the short-term prices. Do you expect additional OPEC production cost cuts, for example, up to the end of this year? For the next year, you have any price estimations?
Thank you for the question. First of all, our word or outlook is more focused on medium to long term aspects of our industry. So we are on also energy market. So we do not, in this publication, we do not deal with the short term. Or short term publication, which is also accessible every month, is monthly oil market review, which is MOMR. You can find it every month in our website, and it gives you insights regarding the short-term aspects of the market. For the VU also, we do not make a price projections when we apply our analysis. We just balance the demand and supply, and we look at the long-term implementation of the policies and technologies. Also the marginal costs, which is marginal costs are also very important. So I cannot tell you something about a short-term expectation, but also regarding the cuts that OPEC, OPEC after the pandemic, OPEC indeed with its other non-OPEC countries, and during the declaration of the cooperation, we implemented the largest stabilization effort in the whole oil history in April. We cut around 10 million barrels of oil just to stabilize the market, to allow the investments for the medium to long term to still come. And that was very, very important action to keep the industry safer, and also the life of the jobs of the people and also the stabilization of the market in the medium to long term. These cuts, either if it continues or not, this is a decision of 23 countries, in fact, oil ministers, and I cannot predict their decision in this regard. But we assure the market to do our best to stabilize the situation, and because the fluctuation is not good for any market.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I would like to ask, maybe both of you can give some discussion points, make some explanations. And we all know that, yeah, Mr. Reza talked about the technology side, which means higher technology in oil and gas makes harder resources to be developed cheaper. And, you know, in addition to these, also the pandemic side also make us the pandemic make the demand decrease, then nearly all the oil in all markets, the oil prices collapsed, and it's around $38 for Brent today. We can see the oil prices are very cheap, and we mentioned that the technology is going to make them cheaper and to make the profits increase. And in addition, for example, from the supply side, lots of companies affected and going bankrupt, and we see we see this situation in many companies in all over the world, mainly in United States. And from that side, in addition, due to pandemic, the governments who are managing the green energy side wants to put lots of budgets, lots of finance for the green energy policies. However, there is not enough finance for new attempts of the green energy side. In addition to this, there is a big India problem, the big India question for the global players to deal on it. This is another question. And in addition, for example, the population increase mainly is expected from the poor countries, which means these poor countries are the poor population will increase. That socially they are not so developed countries, which means they will not find enough finance to make investments in renewables. This is another problem. By combining all these things together, do you think we can manage our green energy goals in the future while the oil prices are cheap? Why don't we focus on why don't we invest for a cheaper resource than investing the green energy? For example, the poor countries or undeveloped countries may think about this strategy. Do you have any ideas regarding with these things, Mr. Reza and Mr. Erfan? I'm asking both of you this question.
I would add maybe, the first things about the green technologies. The issue with the green technologies, still we have a issue in terms of the, let's say, the trusting. It's not reliable for now. You cannot rely on the, let's say, green technology, solar or wind. Both of them, depend on the weather condition, for example, or even if weather. That will affect the supply security. Let's say, for example, another problem here is how you can store the energy. The energy storage also is very expensive right now. There is a battery technology is really, advancing very, very fast. But still it is very expensive, for example, to store the energy. So you can produce electricity from the wind or the solar, but at the same time you have to have some kind of, let's say, the reliable and cheap technology to store that energy, to make sure, for example, during the night time you can have, let's say, enough, let's say, the energy handle the economy, and that's big questions in terms of the, let's say, reliability for the green technologies. Right now, I mean, as I said, I mean, they are advancing in that area, but it's the when go to the, let's say, the big level in terms of, let's say, the country level. I mean, the economists, I mean, or the people or the let's say the politicians or the big companies, let's say CEOs or people wanted to decide that about whether they should shift to the green technology or stay in the oil and gas. I mean, the first question they always ask is reliability, because for them is important question. For them is important to have the, let's say, reliable energy resources for having the stable, let's say, the growth in the production in terms of, let's say, factories or in terms of the economy. So right now, I mean, the U.S. economy is growing, especially in the last quarter. The U.S. GDP grew by 33%. I mean, it's a huge growth. I mean, it's a historic number for the U.S. So that's also happening in the other countries. I mean, because of the pandemic, there was a lockdown and the economy was almost collapsed. And then right now, I mean, it's still going. It's going up, and that's a that's a point. Is that, I mean, most of these politicians or economists, I mean, they concluded that still there is a lot of, let's say, work to do to make sure green technology are reliable. I'm sure in the future it will be reliable, but for maybe, I mean, replacing the fossil fuel. But I mean, it's still, there are a lot of, let's say, that we need at least maybe 50 years to come to that point. And another point here, I mean, we are not using the oil just for the, let's say, the generating the energy. At the same time, I mean, we have a big petrochemical factories. I mean, almost, let's say, 60% of the right now produced oil is going to the petrochemical factories. I mean, using all these technologies and developing a lot of products. Everything's, I mean, is right now made of plastic or some polymers. I mean, the source of the oil. So in the future, most probably there will be some kind of, let's say, change in the role for the oil industry. Instead of, let's say, being the major energy producer, I mean, the oil industry will be the major, for example, the producer of the product like petrochemicals. And then it will shift the energy supply will shift to the green energies. But we have a lot of, let's say, time.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Mr. Erfan.
Thank you for the points mentioned by Reza. I agree with most of the points, and I think that's true. We need more reliability for the renewables, for green energy, and also flexibility because of the timing and the zones and distributions and etc. Still, we see the expectation and we project the growth to be massive, rate to be massive, but from a small basis, which exists now. So as also Reza mentioned, in the future, even if you look at our outlook at 2045, we see still a major above 70% of the energy mix is relied and is based on fossil fuels. So it's clearly a hard word to say that we can switch to renewables or green fully by that time. But the pandemic also had very special impact on the investments in upstream. So we had upstream capital expenditures that could fall in 2020 by around 30%, exceeding the dramatic decline we had in 2015 and 2016. And looking ahead to 2045, our projection shows that we would need around $12 trillion of investment in the upstream, midstream, and downstream to keep the stability and to provide sufficient energy. This pandemic also has been very disruptive in the refining. A wave of refinery closures also is anticipated, even if we have the new capacity additions come online in Asia Pacific, Middle East, or Africa. But the point is, the challenge that we have today, we have to also consider that a well-funded oil industry or oil sector provides many tangible benefits to the global economy. Beyond supplying the energy sources, the energy industry provides a lot of well-paid jobs and highly skilled and stable workers. It creates and it also supports a lot of scientific, engineering, and technical developments that has been so far made. Education also. So the oil industry has been a core of many of the innovations and for more than a century. This is, I think, has been also a spin-off point for the spectrum of the other industries for this matter. So investment is a concern if we do not have enough investment due to these issues, and also in parallel, we believe in the green fuels to take over some of the shares and to have the fastest growing, to be the fastest growing source of fuel. So, or not, I mean, as I said, there is no one solution fits to all. So we need all of these sources to secure the energy, to fight against the energy poverty in many of the regions, including Africa, and to stabilize the energy market and to provide a stable and long-lasting energy supply.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we have completed our session. We only have 2 minutes, and I have to attend another meeting, another session. It's going to be related with Eastern Mediterranean energy sources, and again, it's going to be a TESPAM special session in this conference. I would like to make your video play, but it's better. Your discussions were better than the video. I'm sure about it. I would like to thank our speakers for their very interesting presentations and discussions, to Mr. Reza and to Mr. Erfan. Today we have listened to very good speeches. Before finishing as a TESPAM discussions on these topics, we project somehow different regarding with the peak levels, peak oil levels. For example, our expectations are around 2060s to be as the peak time. And this is due to the effect of demand of increasing population of undeveloped and poor countries. And we cannot manage the Indian side also. The hunger will not be easily suppressed. And world, we don't agree. We don't think that world do not have enough finance to efficiently manage the green energy programs. But there are lots of things to consider, as Mr. Erfan and Mr. Reza talked about it. And in addition to the prices side, we don't expect a harsh increase in oil prices, but the demand and natural gas prices in gas will continue to increase. It does not seem to be observed these price levels in today's gas markets. Thanks very much for listening. And again, I'd like to thank our speakers for their efforts. Thanks very much. I'm closing the session.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.